Episode of the Review Diaries. I am your host, Jackie Moore, and in today's episode, we are going to be talking about the first book in the series by Sarah J.Maas, A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I wanted to discuss these books just because they are really the reason why I loved getting back into reading. I read these books initially, I want to say like 2 years ago, probably 2.5 years ago, so it had been a minute because I hadn't read them again since the first time. And I've read all of the books in like the 3 series that she currently has out right now. At this point, the A Court of Thorns and Roses is an ongoing series currently, as far as we know. There's been no announcement quite yet of when there will be another book out, but I mean, we can all pretty much imagine there will be. But basically, if you don't know about this book series, it is a fantasy YA series, and it follows the main character, Feyre, who is 19 years old, and she is a human who lives in one of the human realms in this world. And her kind of like little town where she lives is right at the wall that borders the fairy world, and they have these rulers and these high lords, and there's high fae and everything. But she is a 19-year-old human, and she has 2 older sisters. She's the youngest of 3, and her older sisters are Elaine and Nesta. And then they have their dad, and they're also very poor because their dad lost all their fortune. So the book begins with our main character, Feyre, who is in the forest, and her kind of like main her main job, really, even at 19 years old, is to take care of her family, because she promised her mom that she would take care of them when her mother was like on her deathbed. And so basically it starts with her in the woods, that she is out hunting for food for her family. For the longest time she could remember, there had always been rumors about the Fae being evil, that they wanted to kill humans and that they hated humans. And it's that kind of thing where it's been ingrained in her mind from a very young age that they are just not to be trusted. So eventually, as she is making her way through the woods, she finds a doe. So she begins thinking of like what all they could do, like with the meat and the skin and everything. So she has a bow and arrow, and she's about to shoot it with her bow and arrow. But she doesn't notice that there is like this humongous kind of wolf hiding next to the doe in the woods. You can kind of like just see its eyes in the background. They're kind of glowing. And eventually it comes out of like the bush and stuff, and she debates on killing it because she thinks it might be a high fae, because there are shapeshifters that are high fae and they can shift into animals and that kind of thing. So she contemplates killing it because she could use the wolf for food, and then its skin, and then it's obviously humongous. And she also thinks it would be like, I guess, a favor to kill it because she thinks that the Fae are evil. And she has a arrow, which is an ash arrow. And according to the legends that she heard as a child, fairies were like hated iron because the ash wood would slow down their healing, so it would be easier for her to kill them. So she stays in position as the wolf attacks this doe. So she fires her arrow like shortly after, and it goes straight through the wolf's eye. So the wolf collapses after she shoots it, and then she kind of determines that she can only carry one animal, and one of them is obviously more heavy than the other. But she does skin the wolf, and then she carries the doe home so they can use it for food. Eventually, now that we're back home with her, we are introduced to her sisters, Elaine and Nesta, and then her father. And her sisters are very oblivious to the obvious blood that is on her, so they make no mention of it. They're not worried about her, they're just not concerned with her whatsoever, which, according to Feyre, seems to be like a very common occurrence. So they notice that she has the dough, and then one of her sisters, Elaine, she asks her like when or how long it will take her to clean it. She doesn't offer to do it herself, which she never really intended to anyway, according to Feyre. And then Feyre reveals that really the only time that Elaine ever really did anything that was like nice, I guess, for Feyre was when she bought her these tins of paint one summer so she could decorate the house. And that she said that she doesn't know if Elaine just refuses to accept the fact that they are poor, or if she just doesn't kind of fully grasp the concept. And then Nesta, which is the oldest sister of the three, she kind of is always harboring resentment towards her father for a lot of things, mainly for the loss of their mother and then for losing their fortune also. He kind of like would always like sit back and never really give opinions on anything. He never objected when Feyre was very young and she would go hunting in the woods. He kind of just lets her like go and not really says anything about it. So Nesta makes a comment to Feyre saying basically like that she stinks and that she shouldn't act like an ignorant peasant. So they start bickering because Nesta did not cooperate with chopping wood for them because it is like winter, so it's very cold and they're almost out. So they start bickering because of that, and then they continue bickering more at dinner because Nesta resents Feyre for her desires for her and her sister to be married off and kind of away from them so she can like kind of be free to do what she wants and paint. And Feyre is resentful towards her for refusing to help provide for the family. And then Feyre makes a comment to Nesta of like, well, you want to marry the woodcutter's son, but you won't cut wood for us, which I thought was incredible. I thought it was funny. So the next day they're at the market and Feyre is trying to sell the fur pelt from the wolf that she skinned. And they bump into some members of the Children of the Blessed, who are these acolytes that worship the Fae, and then they try to convince people to go over the wall and into PRYTHIAN, which is the fairylands, and just be a part of like that world basically. So eventually Feyre talks to this mercenary who she sells a wolf pelt to, and then after that they return home. As they are like kind of gathered around the fire, there's this massive like roar that erupts from their door, and it just like burst open into splinters, and there's this huge gigantic creature at their door. So this creature, it has golden fur and it has horns, and then it demands to know like who killed the wolf. Her sisters Elaine and Nesta are kind of like cowering away in fear, but Feyre, being brave, admits that it was her that killed the wolf. So the beast asks if she was provoked or attacked or anything to find out why she did it, but she says no, and says that it was deserved because of everything that their kind has done to them. And basically there is this treaty with the humans. And we learn that an unprovoked attack on the Fae by humans is paid by human life in exchange. So the beast says that he can either kill Feyre or she can remain in Prythian for the rest of her life. Her father says that she should go, even though he attempts to make some barters in payment for exchange, but they have no money. So Feyre eventually just starts packing her things and goes with the beast. She kind of tries to give her family advice on what to do, how to survive, where they can hunt and everything, but her sisters don't really say anything as she is leaving. She tries to ask the beast like what its name is as they are like headed on their way to the wall, but the beast doesn't answer, and he puts her like under this spell, so she falls asleep before she can ask him more questions, and then she wakes up 2 days later. And they reach this massive estate, and it is beautiful. It has like plants, and it's just massive, and it's surrounded by the forest, and it's just beautiful. As they are kind of nearing the estate, she tries to make an escape plan. They enter the manor, and then there's this like massive table with food and water and wine and everything. But Feyre had always been taught that fairy food and wine is poisoned and that they can enslave your mind with it, so she refuses to drink or eat anything. And then the beast sits down in this chair and it just morphs into this high fae. But he is wearing a mask, but she can notice that he looks young. So he tells her to eat and she says no, but he reassures her that the food is fine, that it's not poisoned or anything, and he also tells her that she can live anywhere in PRYTHIAN that she wants to. So she thinks about it, but remembers her vow to her mother to take care of her family, and knows that she has to go back. So she doesn't eat the food. And then there's another high fae that comes in, and he is wearing a mask. He has red hair, and his mask is kind of shaped like a fox. So we learn that the wolf, his name was Andrus, and the red-haired fairy is Lucian, and he has this like massive scar down his face, and he is missing an eye that is replaced with this like mechanical one. And he is amazed that a human like Feyre would kill Andrus, and also ask her if like her hatred for them was like so large that she didn't hesitate to do so. So eventually Feyre is sent to a room that she will be staying in. The servant that leads her there is named Alice, and she is also wearing a mask. And Alice kind of tries to advise her about keeping her wits about her, since people will be upset with her for killing Andrus. So the next day at dinner, Feyre asked Tamlin and Lucian what they plan to do with her, but they tell her that she's really kind of free to do whatever she wants, only to stay out of trouble. So she kind of does not like this, because she, again, says that her family will be starving and that she will be living in luxury, and that it's not fair, that there must be like some other way for her to pay for killing Andrus, to which Lucian asks if she's like even apologized in the first place about, but she hasn't. And then we learn that the other fairy's name is Tamlin. He reveals that her family is cared for in spite of what she thinks about their kind and everything. He says that there's no way that they would have taken their only form of nourishment and not replaced it. So he is making sure that her family's taken care of. So when he tells her this, she's upset because she doesn't know why he wouldn't have told her this before. And then he's like, well, you wouldn't have believed me anyway. And she kind of makes a move to like stand up really quickly, and he kind of uses his magic to slam her back down in her seat, basically. And he uses these like invisible hands to put her back down in her seat. And he warns her that if she tries to run away and go to the wall to the human lands, that her family will no longer be taken care of. He reiterates to her again that the food is not like enchanted or anything, and that she's safe to eat, but that if she faints or gets sick or whatever, that it's her own fault for being like hard-headed, basically. And so she takes a bite of the food and then finds out that it's delicious, so she like literally devours it. So the next morning, Feyre is exploring the castle, and then she bumps into Tamlin, and he offers to give her a tour of the castle grounds, and she declines, but he reassures her that he's not going to kill her, that she's really kind of free to do what she wants while she is here. She asks like why Andrus was in the woods, because she thought that the treaty banned the Fae from entering the human lands, but he says that the treaty only bans them from enslaving humans. She asks like what he was doing there, and he says that there was this like quote unquote sickness in the lands, and that he was out there trying to find a cure. And she thinks that this like sickness can harm humans, and asks if he can spread to the human lands, and he says that it could, but he doesn't know any more than that. And then the next day at dinner, Tamlin and Lucian are kind of asking her questions to get to know her a little bit more, and then they learn that Feyre's mother died of typhus when she was 8, so They offer their condolences to her, and then she kind of leaves to go back into her room. So Lucian, the next morning, is on patrol in the woods, and then asks Feyre if she wants to join him so he can see her hunting skills. So she agrees to go because she wanted to just explore more to make plans to escape. So as they're making their way on the patrol, Lucian reveals that he is doing this because it was Andros's job and he was filling in for him. And he tells her that he knows about like her little plan to want to escape, and that he is not going to be able to convince Tamlin to free her or find like any loophole to the treaty. Eventually, Feyre kind of tries to ask him a little bit more about the blight and what's making them sick, so he kind of lets it slip a little bit that there was something that was sent from the shitholes of hell, basically, and that he can't say much about it because there might be people around listening to sell information. And so she kind of wonders like who this person is that's making them all afraid and what information they could be selling. And so at this point we learn that there are 7 High Lords in Prythian, and she wonders if this person could be one of them that is governing these territories. She keeps like asking him questions and everything, but he kind of refuses to answer, and that he says that if she wants her questions answered, that she must trap the surreal, which is this like form of Fae, I guess, that kind of all they do is really answer questions. And then immediately after they hear this like noise, and he tells her that no matter what she can't react, that they have to kind of stay still. So she does as she's told, and they can't really see anything. There's just like shimmering, and then she feels this like cold sensation like kind of encircle them, but she can't say anything. She just hears voices, and the voices trying to get her to look and egging her on, but she refuses. And then after some time it leaves. It's like very ominous, and this creature is the bog, and it's a creature that should not be on these lands and can't be hunted, basically. And she asks why they can't look at them, and he says that it's because they can kill you if you do. So they return to the mansion, and Tamlin's not happy that they ran into the bog, so he heads into the woods to try to hunt it. And then Feyre is in her room kind of looking up the gardens to see if Tamlin has returned, and then she notices something in the garden that looks like her father. So she runs out of bed and tries to reach the image of her father, and then as she is almost there, Tamlin stops her. She explains to him that she saw her father, but when she turns back around, it's not there anymore, so it's just a vision. And then Tamlin kind of explains to her that there are worse things out there if she were to escape, so she is angry and kind of tells him how can he expect her to stay there forever, even if he like takes care of her family, because she says she wants to go home and keep her promise. And then after all the years she spent taking care of them, that it's insignificant now. And then he reassures her that the vow that she made to her mother is fulfilled, even though her life is now owned by this treaty. And then Feyre keeps having these recurring nightmares of Andros and when she killed him. So eventually she goes back into her room, and then as she wakes up, she is kind of roaming the mansion, and she hears this noise, and there's a big door that opens, and it's Tamlin, and he's in his beast form, and he is limping, and then he shifts into his like Fae form. So his clothes are like in shreds, he's covered in blood, and she asks him if he killed the bog, so he says yes. She notices that he's limping, so she takes him to the infirmary to cure his wounds, and I thought that this was a pretty cool parallel between Beauty and the Beast, when Belle escapes the palace and the Beast protects her from the wolves, and then they go back and she kind of tries to cure his wounds too, and they have a little like bonding moment after hating each other for so long. So they talk a little bit, and then he also learned before that she can't read. She's like illiterate because she had a map that she was trying to like learn, I guess, so she could like find her way around like the palace and everything. The next day, Feyre is again kind of just like roaming around the halls of the palace or the mansion because there's really nothing else for her to do. And then she overhears Tamlin and Lucien bickering, saying that there isn't much time left and that Tamlin is sealing their fates by ruining everything. So obviously she has like no idea what they're talking about. And she tries to lean into the door to hear more, but she makes a noise, so they like notice her and they catch her. So they act cool, but Lucien tells her that he cannot go on patrol with her today and that Tamlin would be going with her. So they go hunting and they have conversations and stuff, and then they have a little bonding moment where she asks him about his hand and how it's healing and everything, and he says thank you, and then they head back. So they are now in Tamlin's study, so he leaves her alone in there so she can kind of learn how to write. And as she is there, she notices that there is this huge mural, and it's the story of PRYTHIAN, and it has all the territories marked on there, and it's separated by the human realms. And she notices how the Fae part of the map is more detailed than the human lands. So she notices all the courts in PRYTHIAN, so spring, summer, autumn, winter, and the dawn court. And then there is the day court and the night court. And when she looks at the night court, she gets like this chilling feeling in her body. And then after, Feyre finds Lucien in his room, and she asks him how to trap a Suriel. So he tells her, and then with his instructions, she heads to the woods to try and trap a Suriel. So she's in a tree hiding, and she put her like little stair up, and then she manages to trap one, and the Suriel reveals that Tamlin is a High Lord, one of the 7 High Lords of PRYTHIAN. And she asks him about the blight, and he only tells her to, quote-unquote, stay with the High Lord, that she will be safe and that he would shield her from it. And then she asks where the blight came from, and then he explains to Feyre that the king of Hybern and then the kingdom of Hybern, and how the king is unhappy with the treaty, and then starts explaining how the king wants to wage war on humans, but they're interrupted by this creature called the Naga. And he tells her to run back to the manor and stay with the High Lord, but he asks her to free him first so the Naga can get to him. So they are eventually surrounded by these creatures, and the Suriel is still begging Feyre to free him. So she shoots an arrow that frees him, and she attacks one with an arrow and manages to kill it. So she takes off running, but then is surrounded by them, and they try to attack her. So she's trying to fight them off, and then Tamlin makes an appearance like somehow and kills one of them. So one starts to run away, but Tamlin manages to just tackle it and kill it too. And then after that, they head back into the manor. And then at dinner, Tamlin and Lucien reveal to Feyre that the legends that she heard about the fairies not being able to lie and then them hating iron are not true. So they do have like a cute little bonding moment, and they talk a little bit more, and then they settle on being friends so they're not hostile around everyone. And then Tamlin commends Feyre for everything that she's done for her family to help them purely for their sake, and he says that they should be more appreciative of her. And he also reveals that he glamored her family, so they now have no memory of him coming to their house and taking her. And then that same night, Feyre has another nightmare. So the Suriel and the Naga, and then a faceless woman who kept asking her name. And then she wakes up because she hears screaming on the other side of the door. So she rushes to the sounds, and then Tamlin is rushing into the house with a fairy over his shoulder who is covered in blood. So the fairy is sobbing and he is in pain. He keeps saying like, my wings, she took my wings. And it's the same like faceless or nameless like she that they have been referring to that still Feyre does not know who they are referring to. So she notices the fairy's wings were ripped off or sawed off, and they're trying to help him, and then Lucian kind of freaks out and vomits at the sight, so he leaves the room. And Feyre tries to help Tamlin, but Tamlin says that he can't use his magic to heal him because the damage is too extensive. So they realize that this fairy is going to die. So Feyre tries to comfort the fairy as much as she can so he can just die peacefully. And they're about to leave him on the table after he dies, but Feyre says they can't leave him there and that she will help him. But Tamlin says no because it's too dangerous. She also tells Tamlin that she regrets what she did to Andras and that she regretted the hate in her heart and that she wishes that she could undo everything that she did and apologizes. But he doesn't say anything and just takes the fairy outside. So the next morning, everything is back to normal basically, and Feyre is trying to find Tamlin again. She finds him and Lucian, and they take Feyre outside and tell her that they're going on a ride. So they get on a horse and they reach this like beautiful field where they sit down and they just kind of decide to chill out. So Tamlin eventually takes Feyre off on her own, and they reach a clearing with a pool of starlight. And Feyre asked Tamlin how Lucian's doing after last night since he threw up and was sick. So Tamlin opens up to Feyre about his like difficult past and how he is the son of the High Lord of the Autumn Court, the youngest of 7, and that he has a difficult relationship with his family since he never really cared about being High Lord, and that he fell in love with a lesser fairy that his family thought was inappropriate for their bloodline, who was executed by his family in front of Lucian, with his 2 elder brothers holding Lucian down to make him watch. So after this, Lucian abandons his title and left, and then he left to the Spring Court, but his brothers were sent after him, so Lucian killed one of them, and Tamlin killed another since they had crossed onto Spring Court lands and they were trespassing. And it's here that Tamlin claims Lucian as his own emissary. So eventually Feyre and Tamlin get into the pool of starlight and they start having a little moment. They're checking each other out because they're undressed, and Tamlin asks her how their father lost his fortune. So she reveals that they had like generational debt and that his father was trying to find a way out of debt. He had put some money into some ships with some spices and cloths to trade, but they never got to where they were supposed to, and they lost all that money. And then when Feyre was 11, her father basically like gave up on everything, and that's when she started hunting after that. And then when their money ran out, which was a couple years later. So the next morning, Feyre gets painting supplies, and Tamlin shows her the gallery that he has in the mansion where she can paint. So she paints for weeks on end, never lets anyone see her work. And Tamlin is in and out of the Spring Court, and Feyre continues to have nightmares. So she reminisces about her family and the fact that no one really remembers her, is worried about her because of the glamour that Tamlin put on them. And she is beginning to feel resentful of Tamlin because of this, and feels that she just was erased from their lives, but is conflicted because of all that he has done so far to protect her and to make sure that she is comfortable and that she has a space to paint and for saving her life, basically. So he notices that she is kind of upset with him, and they start talking, and she reveals to him that the fact that they didn't try to stop him from taking her is hurtful, but that she doesn't know why she still cares. So he kind of kisses her hands in comfort and tells her not to feel bad about doing anything that brings her joy. And then he opens up about his past and how his brothers kept slaves and how he was just so against it. He opens up about his parents and how they were killed by a High Lord of an enemy court. And then they eventually come out into this little field where they are setting up for the Callan May, which is the Fire Night Festival, to help regenerate the land for spraying and he tells her that there will be other fairies in the area for the festival, but she will have to stay away from them. So she's obviously disappointed that she's not invited to the festivities, but after, when they are walking back to the manor, Lucian appears and Tamlin just tells her to hide. So they glamour her so this like person can't see her basically. And she hears a voice but doesn't see who they're speaking to. And as they are talking to this person, there's mention of this like quote unquote she that Feyre has heard about like on and off. And there is mention of Tamlin having this like heart of stone. But Feyre has no idea what they're talking about. And we learn that this thing's name is the Adder. So eventually it's a day of the Fire Night Festival, and Feyre sees no one like during the day because of the preparations going on, but she hears like this drum beat and music coming from the gardens, and she also has this like feeling in her gut as if something is like summoning her. So she contemplates staying in the house or going towards this like feeling in her gut basically that is like a string commanding her to go. But before she can like make up her mind about whether or not to go, Tamlin appears and tells her that he has to partake in the quote unquote great rite. But before Feyre can ask more questions, he tells her to go to her room and lock herself in and to not come out until the morning. So she obeys him and then goes back into her room and holds out as long as she can before she eventually comes out. And then there's still this like voice in her head beckoning her to go and see what the festival is about. So she goes out and sees that there are these massive bonfires and there are hundreds of fae that she has never seen before. So she is actually glamoured and they cannot fully see her properly. And she also notices this cave where a lot of fairies are gathered. So they're about to perform this ritual in the cave. So she makes her way back to the bonfire when 3 strangers grab her and they aren't wearing any masks. So they realize that she is human. And they start getting aggressive with her, grabbing her hair, her hands, and her face and everything. So they push her to the ground, and then she's trying to obviously defend herself as best she can when someone grabs her. And the 3 fairies like back away really scared, and the stranger thanks them for finding her. And she says that this is the most beautiful man that she has ever seen. So Feyre and the stranger begin having a conversation, and he asks her what a human is doing at the Fire Night Festival. So she lies to him, and even though he saved her from the 3, she's worried because he could be worse than the 3, so she's cautious. He asks her if he can escort her back, but she declines and asks him if he is from the Spring Court. But obviously because he's dressed in like black leather, she says he's not, so they say goodbye and part ways. Afterwards, in the crowd, Lucian spots her quickly and takes her away from Cal and May and says that she's an idiot and explains what the Great Rite is. And it is basically officially the start of spring in PRYTHIAN and in the mortal world, and that the magic that they generate from that night is what their crops depend on, and it is done with the Great Rite. And basically, the 7 High Lords of Prythian perform it every year. For Tamlin, the magic will seize control of his mind and body, turning him into the quote-unquote hunter, where he must kill a white stag in a sacrificial offering, and then enter a cave where fairy females will be waiting for him to be chosen as their mate for the night. So Feyre obviously does not like this. She's a bit jealous at the fact, but she returns to her room where hours pass and she wakes up when it's almost daylight. So she comes out of her room and then bumps into Tamlin, who is in his kind of not beast form, but it's like the magic from the festival basically, so he's not fully himself. And he tells her that he smelled her in the crowd and that he was trying to find her, but he couldn't. So they talk about what happened at the rite, and Feyre kind of taunts him and says that she wouldn't want someone's leftovers. And in reaction to this, Tamlin bites her neck and she calls him an enraged beast. And even though she's kind of feeling it at the moment, and she kind of wants like more from him since he like bit her neck and everything, she walks away from it. So the next morning she has a bruise on her neck from Tamlin, obviously. And when she meets Tamlin and Lucien for lunch, Lucien notices that she has that bruise on her neck. So Feyre and Tamlin are both kind of cold towards each other, and Tamlin says that if Feyre refuses to listen to orders, that he won't be held accountable for the consequences. And Feyre calls him a fairy pig as she storms off, which I thought was actually very funny. But they eventually apologize to one another. So a couple of days later, Feyre and Tamlin are in this like grassy knoll, just kind of lounging, where Tamlin tells Feyre that he can make her see the world through his eyes. And she agrees, so to invoke that magic, he kisses both of her eyelids and passes the magic onto her so she can be able to see through his eyes. And basically everything in the world just becomes richer, her senses are heightened, and she's able to see Tamlin in his form prior to him being glamoured, minus the mask. And she realizes that a lot of the servants, including Alis, have been glamoured, and that many of them were hidden because of this glamour. Like when the adder came and Tamlin glamoured Feyre to keep her invisible, and then the adder not being able to sniff her out, basically. So days pass, and then they are preparing for another festival, which is the summer solstice celebration. So there is plenty of food like those of Fire Night, but the vibe is completely different. It's more of like a massive party instead of like this huge ritual. And Feyre is with Lucien about to pour herself some of the wine, but he warns her not to drink it because it's very like powerful and it's gonna overpower her senses. But of course she disobeys and drinks it, so it heightens her senses and she's acting a bit clumsy and drunk because of how strong it is. And then she also notices that Tamlin is playing the fiddle with the musicians. And Lucien reassures him that he will take care of her in the state that she's in. So she starts dancing, and Tamlin eventually finds her and takes her away, where they encounter air and light spirits called Will-o'-the-Wisp, who are singing to celebrate the solstice coming. And they start flirting, and as they are dancing, they kiss a couple of times pretty intensely. So the next morning, while at breakfast, Lucien reveals that the blight killed 2,000 younglings, and that it is spreading further south, and they are soon interrupted by the fairy who saved Feyre at Fire Night, and we learn that his name is Rhysand. Feyre is glamoured by Tamlin and Lucien to make her seem like she is part of Lucien but invisible. And Amarantha's name is revealed as the presence that has been haunting all of them. But Rhysand is able to scent Feyre, or at least feel her in the room, and the glamour disappears. So he enters Feyre's mind. He has like these invisible talons in her mind and invades it, revealing all her thoughts to Tamlin of him. So Tamlin begs Rhys not to tell Amarantha about her, but Rhys asks her name, and she says it is Claire Better, which is a human girl in Feyre's like little town. And as he is leaving, he says that Amarantha will be waiting for all three of them under the mountain, which is Amarantha's like court. And that night, Tamlin tells Feyre that he is sending her home to keep her safe. But she tries to ask about Amarantha and why she poses such a threat, but he doesn't tell her. Only that when she gets home, she must not tell anyone about where she's been or who she stayed with, because there are spies that will be looking for her. Of course, she wants to stay and fight, but even though she is basically useless in battle and has had no training at this point, Tamlin tells her no. So they start kissing pretty intensely, and they end up having sex for the first time. And Feyre thinks that this will somehow keep her from leaving, but of course it doesn't. So they sleep for a couple hours and they have sex again, and when they are done, he tells her that she is leaving tomorrow, and as she is falling asleep, he tells her that he loves her. So the next morning, she's saying goodbye to everyone, and Feyre is frustrated at them for keeping all of this from her, obviously, even if she couldn't really do anything or had any powers really against Amarantha, but they still kept her in the dark, which she did not like. So Lucien asked Tamlin if she can't stay for a few more days, and she says no. So they kiss, and as they are saying goodbye, he tells her again that she loves her, but she doesn't say it back. She doesn't want to be a burden to him. There's like a huge weight on him with everything that he has to deal with, and also the fact that he is immortal and she is not, and the possibility that they will probably never see each other again. So as she is leaving Tamlin's manor, she is magically put to sleep, and they arrive at her family's like huge new chateau. They have like a ton of servants now, and her sisters don't initially recognize her when they see her, and they ask for her Aunt Ripley, which is the aunt that Feyre was supposedly staying with. So Nesta, of course, asks Feyre why she's being so quiet, and Feyre asks them what has happened to them since she's been gone. So they say that they were given a trunk of gold as an investment, which later doubled, and the money's been pouring into them ever since, and that the ships that they had initially lost with the father's profits were found. And also, I really did not like that in spite of the fact that they had plenty of rooms in the house, they never prepared a room for Feyre of her own, which I thought was really shitty. So Elaine and her father are acting differently, even though her father's limp is a bit better, and now he feels like he has a sense of purpose in life with the money that they now have, but Nesta is observant of Feyre while Elaine and her father are basically oblivious. And Elaine spends a lot of time talking about like her plants and the new garden that she's made in the chateau. And as her and Feyre are talking, she reveals how people now acted differently with them compared to when they didn't have money. And she says that Nesta has been different, barely talks to anyone, but that she actually went to look for Feyre. So some days pass, and as Feyre is in the garden, Nesta is obviously observing her again, and of course they start bickering. And when Nesta calls Feyre out, saying that she knows Aunt Ripley isn't real, she says that the beast glamour didn't work on her, and she says that she had to watch Elaine and their father act as if nothing had happened, that she thought she'd gone crazy for how they were acting when she knew the truth, that she actually went to the wall to find Feyre, but couldn't find a way through. So Feyre realizes basically how much Nesta like really cared about her in spite of everything. I think Nesta shows her love to people in a very different way than Feyre. I mean, she's someone that had never once went out into the woods, had never braved the wilderness, and it was all to try and find Feyre. And Nesta had really been the one to mainly experience the loss of their mother more than they could remember since they were so young. And then Nesta also says that she has wanted to ask her father if he remembers all the time that he almost let them starve to death, and that she let Feyre go out basically into the woods because she wanted to see if he would ever actually fight for them and take care of them and not leave it up to Feyre, and that she hated him for it, and also for letting their mother die, which I think is a very interesting point to bring up because I am a Nesta defender, and having read all of the books already, we kind of get to see her journey, like not only just with herself but her sisters too, but specifically Feyre. And I think people harp a lot on the fact that Nesta is the older sister in the situation, and that she was the one that quote unquote let Feyre go out into the woods and be the one to take care of them, which like is true in a sense, but at the same time there was an adult in the situation, which was their father, the person who could have at least had a little bit more responsibility in the situation and kind of managed that a little bit better. I don't think the blame should be solely put on Nesta, because Yes, she could have also gone into the woods and done stuff to take care of the family, but their father should have been the bigger person and the adult in the situation to kind of really try and take charge of that situation and figure out how the entire family was going to provide and not just have it be up to Feyre. Yes, it is not right for Nesta to have let her younger sister go out into the woods, but it was also not her responsibility or her burden to bear, because people blame Nesta a lot for that, but she wasn't the adult in the situation in spite of her being the oldest. So some days pass and their father reveals that he is thinking of buying the Better land since their family house burned down. This is Claire Better, the human girl that was previously mentioned, and their house burned down and no one survived, but Claire Better's body was not found. So Feyre remembers that this is the name that she had given to Rhysand and realizes that fairies had now come over the wall. So she tells Nesta that she must keep everything that she told her a secret and to not come looking for her or speak her name to anyone. And she also warns them to run at the first sign of danger and to get on a ship and go somewhere else overseas if they can. So she tells Nesta what she knows about the blight or the sickness, but that she believes that Tamlin is in danger, so she has to try and find him. So Elaine somehow magically comes out of the glamour and apologizes to Feyre for just now realizing what was happening. And Feyre just warns them all to be on their guard. So she rides north in hopes of getting to the wall to reach Tamlin. And it takes her 2 days to get there, but she eventually gets to the spring court. And when she gets there, it's very quiet and no one is in the manor. It's empty. So when she gets there, she notices these tracks of blood in the manor as if it were invaded. She doesn't see any bodies or any gore, which gives her a tiny bit of hope that they are still alive. She notices this limping figure in the background and realizes it's Alis, the servant who used to help her. And Alis tells her that Lucien and Tamlin are alive and under the mountain in Amarantha's court. And so Alis tells Feyre about the curse that Amarantha put on Tamlin. Tamlin basically has had 7 years to break the curse and that it hasn't been broken, and that is why she took him under the mountain. So basically this is where we get the backstory on Amarantha and what kind of threat she poses to all of Prythian. Amarantha is the general of the King of Hybern who fought on the front lines slaughtering humans. Her sister Clythia, who fought against humans on Amarantha's side, fell in love with a mortal Jurian. So Jurian was another general on the human side using Clythia for information and betrayed her. He tortured her with an ash arrow until she died. So since then, Amarantha has hated humans. And basically at this point is when the treaty between the humans and the Fae had formed. But Amarantha had this plan in the back of her mind that she wanted to conquer Prythian for herself and destroy the human world. So she stole power from the 7 High Lords and took control of Prythian and dominated it for 49 years, waiting for the moment to basically strike on the human world and take everything for herself. The blight is not real, and she is the sickness that is sending all of these creatures to attack the land. There's no actual sickness, it's just her. So the Spring Court, led by Tamlin's father at the time, had allied with Hybern during the war to enslave humans, and Tamlin and Amarantha met then. Amarantha wanted Tamlin for herself, but he refused her, so she stole his powers. And Lucien was sent to her as Tamlin's emissary to try and broker peace between them, but she took his eye when she refused and then scarred his face because she took it out with her fingernail. And to kind of make amends in her own way, basically, she hosted this masquerade party in the Spring Court, and she said that there could be peace if Tamlin joined her court and became her lover. Of course, he refused, and said he would prefer to marry a human before he ever touched Amarantha. So she cursed him and said he had 7 years before he had to join her under the mountain, and he could only break the curse if he found a human girl who hated fairies to marry him, a girl specifically who had killed one of his men for hatred alone. So the treaty that Tamlin was talking about was actually a lie, and Andros was over the wall, sent to be slaughtered by a human and hoped to cure the land of Amarantha. And the curse could only be broken if the girl told Tamlin that she loved him and actually meant it. So she cursed everyone in the spring court with the mask to make it more difficult for the human to look beyond the mask and actually fall in love with a fairy. And no one could say a word about the curse. And the exact moment that it was over, she seized everyone in his court and took them under the mountain. So Feyre asks how she can go under the mountain, and Alis shows her the way through this cave. And Alis advises Feyre to not drink the wine and to not trust anyone in there or make deals with anyone unless her life depended on it. So Feyre enters the cave, and after endless hallways, she bumps into the adder. So the adder drags her into the throne room of Under the Mountain, where Amarantha is. And she is this fae with blood red hair, and her skin is snow white. So Tamlin is sitting there in a throne next to her, and he has no reaction when he sees her. Feyre tells Amarantha that she is here to claim Tamlin, and she notices that she has a ring on her finger, which encases an eye in the crystal. And also in the throne room is Claire Better's naked, mangled corpse nailed to the wall. So Amarantha addresses the ring as Jurian, her sister's ex-lover, and Feyre has like freaking watery bowels and diarrhea at this moment, which is a common occurrence throughout the series. If you have read, she always has freaking IBS, God bless her. So Amarantha decides to bargain with Feyre and tells her that she is to complete 3 tasks to prove her love and loyalty, and if she succeeds, Tamlin is hers. She can either complete the task or solve a riddle, and the curse will be broken, freeing the spring court. So she is to complete 1 task a month and will remain in a cell or doing work under the mountain. So she agrees to do so, and then the adder proceeds to punch her in the face and keeps punching her literally everywhere until she passes out. So now in her cell, Lucien comes to see Feyre, and Feyre's nose is broken. So he heals it for her, and she faints from the pain. Feyre asks Lucien what happened when Amarantha and Jurian finally faced each other, and he tells her that Amarantha tortured him for weeks until she killed him, but kept his finger bone and his eye, which she preserved with her magic to keep his consciousness and his soul bound to it. So basically he can feel everything in that freaking eye in her ring, which is horrible. So after some time, Feyre is brought to the throne room where Amarantha asks her for her real name, and Rhysand is there, and Amarantha questions him to see if Feyre was the one he saw in Tamlin's estate. He plays it off, saying that all humans look alike to him, but Feyre still refuses to give her name to protect her family, and Amarantha uses Lucien as a bargaining chip to get her to reveal her name. So Rhysand is about to start torturing Lucien when Feyre finally reveals her name. And Amarantha reveals the riddle, giving her a chance to solve it, but is unable to, so she is locked in her cell again. Feyre's first task arrives, and she is supposed to kill this, giant worm thing, which initially I thought was the giant, and I think everyone has thought this at some point, but the giant Alaskan bullworm from SpongeBob. That is and will be forever what I picture when I read this series, no matter how many artworks I look at. That is not the Alaskan bullworm from SpongeBob. So Feyre is out here fighting for her life, and after battling the worm from some time, still in pain from when the adder and everyone else punched her, she is running around, and she realizes that the worm is blind. So she finds a tunnel to catch her breath and to make a plan. and she realizes that this tunnel is filled with bones. So she makes a ladder because she's in this like pit, and she makes a ladder to escape and to avoid the worm from smelling her because its senses are heightened. She covers herself in mud to try and trap it, and also makes these bone spikes in a pit kind of thing. And she is chasing, and as the worm is chasing after her, it impales itself with the spikes, so she completes the first trial. So she doesn't see anyone for a few days after that, but she is in pain and bleeding, and she hopes that she doesn't have an infection, but Rhysand manages to like winnow, I guess, into her cell. So he sees her injuries and tells her that they should make a trade. That if he heals her arm, she is to spend 2 weeks every month with him in the night court when they get out of the trials. So she says no initially, but he keeps trying, telling her that she is dying. And basically he grabs her arm anyway and heals her. And he makes to leave the cell, but she stops him and tries to bargain the amount of days that she has to spend with him in the night court, and they settle on a week. He gives her like a bath with his magic, basically by like snapping his fingers, and she's clean. And she now has the bargain tattoo on her arm, which is all around her arm, and then it is an eye on the palm of her hand. Lucian's mother also comes by Feyre's cell and gives her like a bucket of water to thank her for giving Amarantha her name in place of Lucian's for her life. And then after that, Feyre is asked to complete a task in someone's room. Turns out it is Rhysand's. And she has to sort fucking lentils from ash and embers in a fireplace. And about 2 hours later, he comes into the room and finds her there cleaning. And he kind of tries to talk to her. And she tries to get the answer to the riddle out of him. But he reveals that he can't say it. And he also reveals his wings to her, his Illyrian wings. So after that, Feyre starts getting warm meals in her cell every morning after that, and days pass and she doesn't see anyone. But 2 servants from the night court eventually come up to Feyre's room to take her to another room, and they start painting her body and also dress her up for a party. Rhysand eventually shows up to tell her that he is escorting her, and the paint is magical, and it's so he knows if anyone touches her. So they make their way to the throne room where everyone else is, and Amarantha asks about the tattoo. Rhysand tells her about the bargain they made in exchange for being cured, and they are excused, and Rhysand offers her a drink, but Feyre remembers what Alis told her, so she refuses to drink, but he insists. After that, she wakes up in her cell, and Lucian arrives shortly after, but Feyre has no memory of what happened at the party. And Lucian tells her that she was dancing for Rhys for most of the night or sitting on his lap. After that, the second task arrives, and Feyre is in a pit that contains Lucian, and she has to select the correct lever by answering a question, because the wrong one will cause her to lose, and it will also kill Lucian. She looks at the puzzle and she realizes she can't read it because they're like engraved on the wall basically. So someone must have told Amarantha that she can't read. And Lucian is like literally screaming his head off, losing his mind, asking her to just pick one. And she is trying to solve the puzzle as best she can, but she randomly fucking decides to pick the second lever, and it kind of like burns her a little bit, like to the touch. So she doesn't pick it, and then the tattoo from the bargain also kind of glares at her as if telling her not to pick it. And basically, time is running out, and she is trying to decide which one to pick, with Lucian still screaming his head off for her. And she picks the third one randomly. Her reasoning made, like, no sense. And she's, like, going through it in her head, and, like, the options as to why it made no sense. But she picks it randomly, and she wins. So she is emotional because she realizes that her being illiterate almost caused her to die. And she hears these words in her head telling her like not to cry. Basically, Rhys threw the bond. And he tells her not to cry and not to give Amarantha the satisfaction. And she walks away to her cell to keep from breaking down crying. And when she gets to her cell, she cries for hours and hours and hours. And then Rhys winnows into her cell hours later. And to get her to stop crying, he shocks her by licking her tears off her face. And then some time passes and Feyre starts to lose hope that she's going to make it out of under the mountain alive, and she thinks that she is hallucinating basically because she is picturing the night sky and begins to hear music in her cell, and she hears it from far away and is emotional. And then she starts to picture this palace in the night sky, and she dreams of being able to go there, so it gives her like a little bit of hope. So it's time for the last party before the last trial. So Feyre is painted again, and Tamlin and Feyre somehow end up standing next to each other, and their hands kind of graze. So they sneak off into a room, and in the room they start making out, but Rhys magically appears there and interrupts them. So Tamlin heads out and tells Feyre that he loves her, but as he exits, Rhys snaps at her, telling her that she's stupid, that they could have been caught. And as they are bickering, Rhys kisses Feyre, but Amarantha barges in the cell with Tamlin beside her. And Tamlin is shocked, but they eventually leave. And basically he kisses her so Amarantha won't suspect that it was Tamlin kissing her. So he does it to help her, even though she doesn't agree with it at first. So back in her cell, Rhys stops by again, telling her that he just wants some peace and quiet, and that Feyre is the only person he can talk to without putting herself at risk. And Rhys reveals to her that his father killed Tamlin's father and his brothers. And then it is finally time for the last task. So Feyre is in the throne room. So 2 male and 1 female fairy enter the room with sacks over their heads, and Amarantha says that she has to stab all the fairies in the heart for her final task, and if she refuses, she will die. So Feyre is struggling with this, and she doesn't want to kill anyone, but for Tamlin and his court, she will do it to save them. She stabs the first fairy in the heart, much to her regret and dismay. And the next fairy is reciting a prayer, and Feyre is distraught but stabs her too. And the hood from the last fairy is removed, and it turns out that it is Tamlin. There's a vision of Tamlin sitting next to Amarantha on her throne, but it is actually the adder. And Amarantha says that Feyre can forfeit her life in exchange for Tamlin's if she doesn't want to kill him. And Feyre starts kind of recalling her entire time in the Spring Court, and then the lies that Tamlin told her to protect her, but also what he exposed her to, so she would listen to everything that was going on around her. And she keeps recalling her memories and conversations between Tamlin and Lucien, and when there was mention of Tamlin having a heart of stone, and what the adder had said about that too when they were in the garden. So she rationalizes that Tamlin couldn't be killed by being stabbed in the heart because it had been turned to stone. She tells him she loves him, and then she stabs him in the heart. And although he is bleeding, it doesn't fully go through his heart because it is stone. And this pisses off Amarantha, so she literally grabs Feyre with her magic and slams her into the floor, breaking her bones, trying to get her to admit she doesn't love Tamlin. She refuses to do so. So Amarantha keeps repeatedly breaking her bones, slamming her into the floor, and then Rhysand tries to tackle Amarantha, but she retaliates with her power. She's just too powerful. So Feyre's life kind of starts flashing before her eyes, and she still refuses to, she doesn't love Tamlin. And Tamlin begs Amarantha to stop torturing Feyre, and Feyre starts recalling the riddle in her mind, and she solves it. But Amarantha, before she can do anything, snaps her neck. So Feyre is now kind of out of her body, and she can see her dead body on the floor and her neck snapped. Amarantha is like begging for her life, and Tamlin attacks her and kills her. And then Feyre realizes that she is seeing all of this through Rhysand's eyes. Everyone slowly in the room starts realizing that Feyre is dead. So all of the High Lords gather around her body, and they each give her like a part of their power. So she wakes up a High Fae. So Amarantha is dead and everyone's free. So Feyre and her senses are heightened, and she is like not used to any of that. And she is racked with guilt over killing those two Fae. And then Feyre and Tamlin reunite and they have sex. So Feyre wakes up because of a thread tugging at her mind, and it is actually Rhysand. So she finds him and he wants to say goodbye to her. And as they're saying goodbye, she notices this visible shock on his face, and he stumbles before disappearing and saying anything. And eventually the spring cord escapes under the mountain and returns home. And that is where the first book ends. And I will say, with this book specifically, just because I have read everything else that Sarah has written so far, this one specifically, and I think a lot of her first books in a series are hard to get into because it's such like a info dump. And I think this happened to me initially when I first read it like 2 years ago. I thought it was like it dragged along a lot in like the first 200 pages, and for some reason in every single one of her books she does this thing where the last 250 pages are just packed with action, and it's like a slow burn basically. And I think reading these books again after reading all of the other ones and kind of seeing how all these little things like tie together with the other series and all the other worlds and everything and how it comes together, it was like so much more enjoyable this time for some reason. It still kind of dragged a little bit in some parts, but it was crazy to see how I didn't notice like certain details with certain characters, and then how my opinion changed on certain characters too. I think with Tamlin specifically, I kind of have a different feeling to him now, because when I first read it, at least this book, I did like Tamlin, but I was a bit wary of him. I didn't know how I felt, and there were certain things that he did that I didn't agree with, which I mean I still don't, but at the same time I have kind of learned to appreciate or maybe open up my mind more to his reasons maybe. Also Rhysand, I think when I first read the book I didn't know how I felt because we were just introduced to him like so late in the game, and he was kind of very mysterious. But in seeing him again in the book now and how he is introduced, it made me only, I think, appreciate him more and why he acted the way he did. So I don't know, I'm very excited to like go through all of these books again and just kind of see how I feel differently now than initially. I think I'm most excited for Throne of Glass just because that's such a like exciting and fun series. I think the ACOTAR series is very near and dear to my heart just because I love the characters so much, and it's a comfort world, I think, to me. And I love the characters, and it's just like such a fun time to read these. I know that people have their strong opinions about this series and this author sometimes, but I really enjoy them. And also I will be like covering a variety of different things. I won't just be doing fantasy. I want to, like I said, expand my horizons more with my books and my taste. So I hope that I am able to do stuff that everybody enjoys. But because these books will be taking like a long time for me to cover, it is going to like take a long time for me to finish if I keep doing like all of them, which I do want to, but I won't be posting like only Sarah J.Maas content for books. I'll be like alternating, and if there is another book that I really, really want to talk about more than, I don't know, the next Throne of Glass or the next ACOURT, I'll definitely do it. It's just a matter of figuring out how I want to do this and the format I want to do it in. Of course, these are like only the first couple of episodes, so they're going to be rusty and probably boring, so I do apologize if it was in parts. It's just me trying to get back into the groove of everything and figuring out how I want to do it, how I'm going to, I don't know, basically go through all of this stuff when there's like so much to cover. I have to figure out like a better way. But if you did enjoy this episode, thank you so much. For the next episode, I'm going to be covering a more lighthearted and fun topic, I think, and that is Anyone But You, starring Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell. I watched it probably a couple weeks ago, and I really, really, really enjoyed it, so that is definitely something that I will be covering next. And yeah, please remember to follow me on my social media for updates or anything, and leave a like and a review anywhere that you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for listening and taking the time to hear me talk and rant about fairies for a very, 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 very long time. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you next time.